So far, we have our instance data variables to describe our objects, our constructors to set up objects, getters and setters to allow clients to access private instance data variable information. The fourth component that we're going to put into every single class that we write that represents an object is a toString method. The toString method returns a text representation of an object. It has this exact header. So this is another special method that has to have this exact method header. We'll eventually learn why. So just like main has to be exactly public static void main, string array args, toString has to be public string toString no parameters. That is what the method header has to be. Once you include that method header, then you get to decide what code to put inside the method. And what you're going to do is create a string that represents your object. So typically that string will include all of the information about your object, so a description of all of the instance data variables, but sometimes you won't include them all. You get to decide what you think the best text representation of your object is. The nice thing about toString is that it allows you to easily print an object. And because it's this special method, you actually don't even have to directly invoke it. If you put an object inside of a print line, toString will be automatically called behind the scenes. And I'll show you what that looks like in a moment. So every class that you write that represents some object should have a toString method. So it's important that you include a toString method. So let's take a look at our class. So this is our class so far, and I'm going to add our last building block component, public string toString. So again, this is the exact header, has to be public, has to have return type string, has to be called toString, and takes no parameters. And then I just need to decide some string that I think describes my die. So I want to include the face value because that's the information I have. That's the characteristic of my die. So I'm going to perhaps say return the string die value with face value, something like that. And you can decide exactly what that should be. Now, the nice thing about that is when I come over here now, if I want to print out my die, I can invoke die1.toString, just like I would invoke any other method. And it says die value of 2. But as I mentioned, because this is a special method, I actually can leave off the explicit invoking of toString, and it will be invoked for me behind the scenes. So you can see it's now printed twice, once for the here and once for here. There are very few times in Java when you don't have to explicitly write something. Almost in most places in Java, what you write is what happens. Nothing else happens behind the scenes. This is one of the few cases where something does happen behind the scenes. And the reason is printing out an object is so common. We do it all the time. We want to see what our objects look like. And so Java gives us this nice shortcut of not having to type in toString. It's okay to type it in, but you don't have to, and it's most common to not see it typed in. And you could just put your object right inside a print line. Now, if you do not have a toString, so let's say I didn't write that, and I try to print my object, what I get is this, die at 7960847B. So this is actually the name of the class concatenated with a version of the hash code, which we're not going to talk about what that means. You're welcome to look that up a little if you'd like to. The real thing you need to know about this is that it's not useful at all, right? If I print out die1 as that and die3 as that, this doesn't tell me anything about these two die objects, right? To a human, this is not helpful. So I want to have a toString method so that when I print my object, I get something and not this stuff that doesn't help a person, right? It doesn't help a human know anything about the object. So if I have my toString, then I automatically get the text printed that I defined. Okay. And again, you get to decide what that text will look like. So every class you write, again, that represents an object should have a toString in it. So this is just a breakdown of what our method looks like. Typically, your string will include all of your instance data variables, but there might be times when you decide to leave some out. You get to make that decision. Now, one important thing to note is that just invoking toString doesn't do anything. It returns a string, but then you're not doing anything with that string, right? So that will cause nothing to happen. So if I comment these lines out for a moment and I just invoke die1.toString, well, that's going to compile just fine because it's a valid method that I can invoke on die1, but it doesn't actually print anything. All that happens here is the string is returned and then I ignore it. So if you ever see toString on its own like that, it's probably a mistake because that line doesn't do anything, right? toString does return a string, so we can do with it anything we would do with a string. So we can store it in a variable. We can put it in a print line, right? So we can do with that string anything we want. The most common thing to do is print it, but there are other things you can do as well. You can do anything you want. Anything that you could do with a string, you can do with the method invocation of die1.toString. For example, I could say string upper die string equals die1.toString, which returns a string, and then invoke to uppercase on that string. And if I print that out, you will see that I printed it out in all caps. So die1.toString returns a string, so I can take that string and I can do with it anything I can do with a string. One thing I can do with a string is invoke to uppercase, right? So I could do that. I could put it inside of a call to concatenate it with some other string, right? I can concatenate it using the plus operator. So I could say, string 2 dice string equals die1.toString plus and die2.toString. What's my other die? Actually, die3. Okay, so here, and then it would help if I print it out so we can see it. Okay, so we can concatenate them just like we would with any other string. Now, when we're concatenating, if we leave off the toString, we're allowed to do that as well because behind the scenes, toString is invoked. So in a lot of places, toString is automatically invoked. It won't be invoked in every place. So for example, I cannot say die1.to uppercase, right? Because this is trying to say invoke to uppercase on a die object, and that doesn't work. It doesn't automatically convert it to a string in every case. But if you are trying to print it, if you're trying to concatenate it, it will automatically invoke toString. If you're ever not sure, you can of course always just explicitly invoke toString, and that will always be correct as well. So those are our 4 basic building blocks that are going to go into every class we write. Now that we've got all that set up, now we can move on to the actual, usually fun part of writing our class, which is thinking about the actual class-specific methods for the object that we're representing.